Honorable FIFI Franklin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, Mr. Speaker, let me also add my voice to the debate for the approval of the supplementary estimate. In so, Mr. Speaker, let me make a reference to a statement made by the minister in delivering his speech last Thursday. The minister actually said that his government has shown such superiority as far as the management economy is concerned that it is important that they are trusted with the money to be able to manage the post-COVID recovery of our country. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that there can be no statement that is further from the truth. In 2016, Mr. Speaker, this country had a force majeure that affected the FPSO and affected oil production. As a result of that force majeure, we had growth that ended that year at 3.4%. This year, with oil growth coming down by just projected 7.7%, we are talking about a GDP of 0.9%. In 2016, the oil growth was affected by 15.6%, and we still managed to have 3.4% GDP. This year, less than half of that, and we are talking about 0.9%. That is what you call shambolic performance. What you call abysmal performance. A much higher drop, 2016, and yet our GDP growth stood at 3.4%. And you are having just this, and you are having 0.9%, tells you how absolutely abysmal you have been. And as my brother John Jinako did mention, you cannot hide under COVID, because all around us countries that are performing far superior. So you cannot use this as an excuse. Cote d'Ivoire is facing COVID. They are growing by almost 3%. Yes. Rwanda is growing by 3.5%. And all these countries around are performing. You are unable to perform simply because of the 7% projected drop in oil. That is not an excuse. Mr. Speaker, we're talking about a government that came into office in 2017 and spoke a lot about 6.3% budget deficit that they had, and actually made it look as if that was the most disastrous situation that the country can talk about. Today, we are talking about a budget deficit that has shot up quickly to what? 11.8%. That's a double digit deficit that we're talking about. And what's the excuse? The excuse is that oil revenues are going to be affected. Oil revenues were largely affected also in 2016. Yet we had a deficit of 6.3%. Mr. Speaker, we're talking about inflation. This government, inflation of 15.4%. Inflation was brought down from 19%, that was at the close of 2015, to 15.4% by 2016. You have met inflation at 15.4%, and in almost 4 years, inflation still is in double digits, 11.2%. And yet you claim you are a serial manager of the economy. That obviously cannot be the case. You have not been able to keep inflation in single digits for more than 2 years. And you are talking yourself being superior to a group that has kept inflation single digit for as long as 33 long months in our history. How can you call yourself superior to us? Mr. Speaker, talking about treasury bill rate. We are talking about a group that made treasury bill rate about 16% when they came into office. As we speak today, 900 treasury bill stands about 13.9, almost 14. Went from what, 16 to 14%, and you are calling yourself superior manager. We met treasury bill rate at 7% back in the time 2008, brought it down into 6. Even when it came back, even after it was in the end of 2015, treasury bill rate stood at about 25%. Within 12 short months, we brought it down to 16%. You have not been able to move even beyond 2%, and yet you are calling your superior managers of the economy. Exchange rate. In the crisis year of 2016, exchange rate stood at 9.7%. You into office, by 2018, exchange rate had gone to, in 2018 it was over 12%. As we're talking today, the CD continues to depreciate, and yet you call yourself a superior manager of the economy. Now, talk about COVID. Under the guise of COVID, what we have today is actually talking about COVID-related expenditure of 11.2 billion cedis. COVID-related expenditure. Mr. Speaker, that amount of 11.2 billion cedis is more than the total debt from Kwame Nkrumah to the end of Kufuor's regime. How many years? I mean, over 50 years. The total debt of Ghana, that was maximum 9.5 billion. And you are talking about COVID-related expenditure of 11.1 billion, 11.2 billion. Taking advantage of COVID to engage in nothing short of fiscal recklessness. Fiscal recklessness. Mr. Speaker, we're talking about creation work today. We have debt to GDP ratio. That is now moved from 57% to now 67%, approaching 70% threshold, the dreaded threshold of 7%. And what is there to show? When you ask, they say, well, they spent 3 billion series on free SHS. You had access to 300 billion cedis in the space of 3.5 years. And all you can boast of is 3.2 billion cedis in free SHS, a drop in the ocean. Nothing to boast about. Mr. Speaker, let's get a little more about some of the main issues that happened over the period. This is a government that will say to have been the most favorable government in virtue of the assets that you inherited. Some of those assets, you had access to 2 massive oil fields. No other government in our history have had. You have access to, a gross international reserves of 6.2 billion. You had access to a fund of minimum 3 billion a year. You had access to a situation where Doomsor was solved. Mr. Minister was trying to take credit. Mr. Minister for Information, Doomsor was resolved long before your government came to power. So don't stand here and try to give the impression as if you had anything to say. We had access to Exim Bank that was set up for you. Today you are using to fund some of the project without even showing gratitude. You had access to co-production of almost 1 million metric tons handed over to you. You had a contingency fund, 530 million handed over to you. A trouble gas that was saving you a minimum 300 million a year. All these are massive legacies that we handed over to you. We handed over to you a balance of payment surplus, gave you the most unprecedented legacy of infrastructure in our history. Handed over to you a bus stop that today you are using as a boat for all your food, planting for food and job. And what do we have for all this? Nothing, very little to show. As we talk today, shambolic double-digit deficit, 0.9% abysmal GDP growth, collapsed businesses, contractors that are not being paid, unemployment at a high level, and all kinds of agony and suffering that you have brought. And in the midst of slogans upon slogans, duplicity, hypocrisy, broken promises, that has been the order of the day. Growth, 14.4%. It was not because of oil. The non-oil growth in that year stood at 8 cents, solid, which has been the highest we have had so far. And yet, you beat your chest and call yourself superior manager. You don't know anything about authority in economic management. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.